June 30th, 2020 Select Board to order. And as we're all aware, I have to open with reading the remotely conducted open meeting laws during COVID. So as a preliminary matter, permit me permission that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. So members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Peter Carlson.
Peter Carlson is here.
Matt Often.
Matt Often is here.
Colleen Roy.
Colleen Roy's here.
Ed Prisby.
Here.
Thank you. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tim McInerney. We'll go back to him. Becca Meekins.
Becca Meekins here.
Okay, and anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Haddad.
Here.
And then we know Bob DeToma is also here recording. And Tim just joined us as well. Tim, can you please respond in the affirmative that you can hear me and you are present?
McInerney here.
Thank you. All right, good evening. This open meeting of the Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of open meeting law and to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted on the town's website at www.grafton-ma.gov, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so as long as reasonable public access is afforded, and so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment, and I'll explain that in a minute. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening by Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. So please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supported materials have been provided. Members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. So we are now going to turn to the first item on the agenda, but before we do, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business to ensure accurate meeting minutes. So I, as acting chair until we reorg, will introduce each speaker on the agenda. And after they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. So please hold until your name is called. Remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking and speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. If for any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. And then finally, each vote will be taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Okay, so first item on the agenda is announcements. And I just have a couple of short announcements here. I want to start by congratulating Matt Often and Colleen Roy on their election to the select board. So Colleen Roy, welcome. Matt Often, welcome. I look forward to working with both of you. And thank you for your service to this community. I also want to congratulate Dan Conca on becoming town moderator. As many as you already know, Ray served as town moderator for about 20 years. And so Ray, I also want to thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for orchestrating the town meeting during this incredible time that we are living. And thank you also to all of those who helped make that meeting happen and go off pretty much without a hitch. We would like to thank the towns of Shrewsbury and Littleton for donating sneeze guards for the election workers who checked in on us at town meeting and who ran the town election. And I just have quickly a few more people I'd like to thank. Donna Stock, thank you for serving as a select board member and for all your work on the Disability Commission as a representative. I so appreciate your work and your dedication to our community. And Jen Thomas, who served as select board member for 6 years, sitting in all these seats, some of them more than once, serving as chair twice, as vice chair, and as clerk. She was representative on numerous town committees and served the town with grace and as a true public servant, always having the town's best interest in mind. So Jen, again, I just want to thank you for all of your years of service on this board. And lastly, I just want to congratulate all those who stepped up to serve in all the other positions, whether they were contested or not. Thank you in advance for your service and dedication to the town of Grafton. So that's all I have as far as announcements. So I'm going to move on to the schedule, and the first item on the schedule is role of the select board chairman. So this was something that Matt Often brought to my attention to put on the agenda, and after some conversation, we thought that it would be a good idea to have this discussion before we reorganize, which is first, instead of having it part of the discussion, that it was an important enough agenda item to put it separate. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Matt if you want to say a few things and a few thoughts about this, and then we can have an open discussion as a board about it.
Sure. Yeah, I just thought that since we're reorganizing, it would be a good idea for us to all get a baseline understanding and agreement on what the role of the chair is on this board. It's obviously different on different boards and committees within this town and within other towns. So I thought it would be a good idea for us to just have that discussion. So some of the things that I would be interested in exploring and getting potentially agreement on is around, what's the role of the chair with regards to communication, with regards to interaction with the town administrator and other town officials, with regards to meetings. So I'd rather not direct the conversation, but I think those are the things that we should agree on before we agree on who's the right person to do that on this board.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone else have any comments or ideas about this? I'd like to give an opportunity to the board first before I speak.
Madam Chair, just over the years, having observed this board and how other boards and committees work, there are, I think, some important qualifications that a chair should have and some important delineations about how their role is different from that of the other members of the board, but also some notes about how it's very much not different. So I think that first and foremost, the chair needs to be organized, be able to respond to correspondence from the town administrator in a timely fashion, have an open line of communication with the town administrator and staff, and relay necessary communications to the rest of the members of the board. And it's a job. I mean, everybody here has other things to do during the day that they actually are their roles in their just regular life. But it is an undertaking to keep all this organized and rolling on a week-to-week basis, because Tuesday night ends, you try not to think about this stuff too much on Wednesday, and before you know it, it's Thursday, and there's another agenda that's going to be posted by Friday for the next meeting. So it's a constant job, I think, to keep the goals that we establish at the beginning of a year rolling through the course of the year, and not just treat every meeting like it's its own independent thing, but rather it's a story that we're telling about our own achievements and accomplishments and goals for the community over a 12-month period. So that sort of responsibility, I think, rests with the chair. And the other thing is just to, I think, and this would be harder for me, candidly, to sort of keep out of the conversation a little bit and facilitate the maximum amount of positive and helpful dialogue during the course of the meeting, and then stem back some of the less helpful dialogue during the course of the meeting, and just keep running a good meeting. I think we've all been in meetings that have gone too long. I think we've certainly have all been in meetings where some of the dialogue wasn't the most helpful. And for better or worse, it's going to fall on the chair to really keep things moving in an efficient and helpful and collaborative manner. That's the role. It's not to dictate terms. It's not to be the most important person in a group of 5. It's really just to facilitate, kind of like a coach would, get the most out of the team, and achieve something tangible. I mean, that's kind of how I see it.
You're on mute, Doreen.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a whole 2 weeks, so I lose track of my mute and unmute. Yeah, I said thank you for that insight, Ed. And I just wanted to ask if anyone else wanted to add to that. Okay, I have a few things to add if the board is finished with the discussion. And that is, I agree with everything Ed said, and I will also add that I think it's important that the chair and the public recognize that we're a 5-member board that the chair has no more power or say than the rest of the board. And so I agree with the sense that the chairperson should be a facilitator, and any information coming from staff should also be communicated immediately and effectively with the rest of the board. That it should be understood that just because the chair is sort of maybe the focus person as far as agenda or the direct line of contact to the town administrator or the town administrator's office to set up these agendas and meetings, that it's important to also recognize that that doesn't give the authority to the chair to make any decisions or hold any information for any amount of time. That the rest of the board needs to be aware of situations as soon as possible, and so we can all lead effectively. Okay, if no one else has any other comments, there's no action item to be taken here, so I can just close this discussion and move on to the reorganization. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to select board reorganization, we can have more of a discussion about this, or I can just take a motion.
How would the motion go? Remind me. Madam Chair, I move we reorganize the select board.
Okay. We can start with that, or we can reorganize starting from chair and then make the determination if we're going to reorganize vice chair and clerk as well. So do
I
we?
like that. So moved.
Okay, so I will take a motion for electing a chair to the select.
Madam Chair,
Second.
Mr. Prisby.
I nominate Peter Carlson to be chair of the select board.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'd like to discuss a little bit if it's all right. So I'd like to bring up the idea that it might help this board to have some continuity and that we not necessarily think about the type of succession that we've seen in the past. So as we think about all of these roles, what I've observed in other towns is that it's not uncommon for somebody to chair multiple years to provide some consistency for the town administrator and the board itself. And so I'd just like to sort of comment on the idea that perhaps we would, not tonight, but think about if we, are appointing a chair, maybe we try to appoint somebody that is going to be on the board for a period of time and that they think about serving for a couple of years so that we can have that sense of consistency and kind of steady leadership, I guess, so that it doesn't have to reorganize every year. I've seen that being quite effective in other towns. If you've got somebody who's a good chair, who has broad support from the rest of the board, who is, can function well in that role, that can be a good situation in certain towns. And so I'd just like the board to think about that for this chair position.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Colleen?
Would that require a policy that we would need to put in place so that going forward that we don't always reorganize as new members come on if it's not necessary, if those positions are being held currently that we wouldn't need I'm just wondering.
Peter?
Thank you. So I think there's a couple parts to that I think we need to look at is one, just make sure that if the board decides to move on a policy like this going forward, that we just check our home rule charter and bylaws just to make sure that we're in alignment with that, especially around when they say after every town meeting. I think there's a component, I can't recall off the top of my head if it's a bylaw or a town charter that says that committees will be organized upon the annual town meeting, after the annual town meeting. So, I think we should look at that, but maybe bring back find out where that may be, if there is something that may need to change on the town side, which would require obviously a change of the charter, if that's the case, or a change of the bylaw. That's all I would recommend before implementing such policy.
Great.
Madam Chair.
Matt?
Yeah, just quickly, I guess I'm not suggesting necessarily we change any bylaws, but I'm just, I guess, suggesting that even though we would have the opportunity to reorganize, we think about perhaps as we go forward, just maybe breaking the notion that we have to do a succession plan, that going forward, we would reorganize, but potentially have the same chair, and that we just discuss the idea that this changing up of the chair every single year may not necessarily be the best thing, even though that's what we've done historically.
Anyone else have any comments? Okay. So as far as what Matt is proposing, I have also seen this be successful in other communities, and I don't believe that there's any policy around it. That doesn't stop us from creating a policy around it. I just think that it really, in my opinion, depends on the board and what the board, decides they are most comfortable with. So I would say, depending on election years and who the board decides will be most effective as their chair, um, it would be a decision that I think still needs to be made year after year. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant on whether or not to put together a policy or just accept the fact that we would elect a chair and that person would stay on. And also the fact that that person may not want to stay on as chair long term, because it is, a time consuming role. So I will also add that with the motion on the table of Mr. Carlson being chair, that I think that he would make an excellent chair of this board. And if he accepts the motion, and he has his experience from school committee that he brings, I think that he is very professional, and I think that he would serve the board well. So those are my comments. So any further discussion on this matter? Okay, by roll call, all those in favor?
Carlson, aye.
Frisbee, aye.
Roy, I.
Often I.
Fazio, aye. Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I am now going to turn the meeting over to you, if that's okay, and you can continue the reorganizing.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for those kind words. And thank you, everybody, for your confidence in me. So without further ado, let's open up nominations for vice chair. Do I have a nomination and a motion?
I nominate Doreen DeFazio to be vice chair.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor by roll call vote?
Frisbee, aye.
Often I.
Roy, I.
Fazio, aye.
Carlson, aye. Thank you. Okay, next up, last but not least, my favorite position here. Do we have a nomination and a motion for clerk?
Mr. Carlson,
Mr. Prisby.
I nominate Colleen Roy as clerk.
Second.
Okay, motion made in second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, not hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote?
Fazio, aye.
Frisbee, aye.
Often I.
Roy, I.
Carlson, I declare motion carried. Thank you. Last but not least, we just have a question from the audience. Can we have whoever seconded the motion for chair? Who was that, please?
Might have been me.
Okay, Colleen, thank you. Thank you. Just want to make sure I got that. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on here. Next up, we have coronavirus update. Mr. McInerney, Smeekins, anything you want to give us an update on?
Yeah, just briefly, we haven't reported in 2 weeks or so, but we had no new cases reported today. We're still at 96. We had one on Sunday reported, but there was a stretch of 5 days without any reports of COVID-19 cases. We are still encouraging people to follow state guidance and practice social distancing and wearing face masks and practice good hygiene. There was a letter from the Department of Public Health that came to municipalities today that we will post online with further guidance on reopening and best practices that restate the aforementioned. So that's really the long and short of it. I know there's other pieces on the agenda that might relate back to COVID and funding, which we'll cover at that particular time, unless the board has other questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McInerney. Appreciate that update. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that the town is doing, keeping everyone updated on the information. Hopefully we'll see a positive trend in our community and our state moving forward, and starting to see things reopen safely and effectively. Thank you. So next up here on the agenda, we have appointment for select board representatives on various committees. You all should have received an email, I believe earlier today, with a list of those. If not, I can share my screen out with those lists if people would like. Want me to share that out? Yes.
Yeah, would you mind just at least for a minute while I pull this up on my phone?
Oh, I think if I gotta have someone allow me to have, there we go. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have this list here. This was last updated back, I believe, in November. So we have a couple of committees on here. I guess we got to, first things first, and we will talk about this later date. There's some things on here that I just want to know if they're still active. But starting from the top, we have Grafton Sustainability Commission. We have Affordable Housing Trust, Charter Franchise Negotiation Team for Cable TV, CIPC Capital Improvement Planning Committee, Central Mass Regional Planning Committee, Disability Commission, DPW Facility Building Committee, Economic Development Committee, Fire Department Study Committee, Library Planning and Building Committee, MBTA Representative, Open Space Recreation Committee, Recycling and Solid Waste Study Committee, and Tax Increment Financing. So there's a few vacancies as a result of the election. Do we have anyone or any volunteers who would like to serve? In addition to that, there should be two, apparently, according to the way the charge read, for the Grafton Sustainability Commission. So I didn't know if there was any of the newer elected members on the board would still want to serve in that capacity. So why don't we just start right down that list from that I've got highlighted here.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think that charge you're reading off of is old and was amended. We eventually agreed that there would be just one member of the select board on the
Okay.
Sustainability Commission.
Probably my notes, my bad. Yep. All right, thanks.
And also,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'll volunteer to be in the Affordable Housing Trust.
I wanted to get to the next one there. So you still want to be on, obviously, Grafton Sustainability Commission, okay?
Yes,
Affordable Housing Trust. Real quick, does anyone want to make a motion to that?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fazio?
I just want to back up for one moment, if we could hold the Affordable Housing Trust conversation. The Grafton Sustainability Commission, I'm just curious, I think we put that, we voted on that a year ago, and I just didn't know if there was anything on that charge that that ended the committee in any way in January or in March, or if it's still open. I just want to make sure while we're going through this, that if this committee is still active, that there was no end date to it.
I don't think there's an end date to the committee. I think there was an end date to getting the report out. And, it couldn't get done. It probably could stand an amendment to the charge, which we can throw that on the next agenda.
Okay. Great. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. Got that. All right. Anything else on that first item, Grafton Sustainability Commission? All right. So moving on to Affordable Housing Trust. I understand Mr. Prisby has an interest in serving in that capacity. Is the committee okay with just going down and just doing a motion for each one of these that we want to do? Okay, great. I'll open that up for a motion for nomination for a Grafton Affordable Housing Trust.
I motion Ed Prisby be our select board representative on the Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote?
Fazio, aye.
Often aye.
Roy, aye.
Carlson, aye. Thank you. Declare the motion carried. Okay, next up is the Charter Franchise Negotiation Team. This is the cable TV access franchise fee. Just for your information, I've done several of these in the past as a select board representative and as a member at large about 10 years ago. If no one wants to do it, I'd be more than happy to sit on this, but I wanted to give someone else an opportunity. It's a great thing to learn about where our franchise origination fees come from cable TV.
Mr. Carlson,
Mr. Frisbee.
I nominate that Peter Carlson serve on the Charter Franchise Negotiating Team.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion made and second, and by the second, and I guess there's no interest from anybody else. So in that case, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor by roll call vote.
Frisbee, aye.
Roy,
After.
I.
Doreen, did I get a vote from you yet?
You did, sorry, DeFazio.
Carlson, I thank you. Okay, declare the motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
So Bill August, we retained him to be legal counsel for this, and I know you know Bill because you've served with us on this before. I just need to set up a conference call with you and Bill because we are very close to having a deal done with them.
Right.
So I just want to give you notice that I want to get you on a call with Bill August as quickly as possible.
That sounds great. Circle back after the meeting, maybe tomorrow morning. We'll figure out our calendars and what works best for you, Bill, and myself. Does that work?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. McInerney. Okay, moving on to Capital Improvement Planning Committee. Ed, do you want to still remain on this one, or
You know, Pete, Mr. Chair, I'd be willing to roll off of this. I think we've got two new members of the board who are very, very familiar with the workings of the CIPC, and I think the committee would be well served by one of them expressing some interest in this one.
okay?
Speaking of continuity,
Mr. Fauci, do you have any interest in serving on this? I know you served out in the past. I know you just want to make sure everyone had an opportunity to speak before we take a motion. No, okay. All right, I'll take a motion for a nomination for CIPC.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Opton,
I nominate Colleen Roy for the Capital Improvement Planning Committee representative position.
okay, I got a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote?
Frisbee, aye.
Often I.
DeFazio, aye.
Roy, I.
Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Let's do this. All right. Central Mass Regional Planning Committee. You leave Mr. McInerney on that one? That one usually meets during the day. Pretty active group. Okay. Disability Commission. Is there anyone interested in serving on the Disability Commission? Mr. Often.
I am.
Okay. Do I have a motion to nominate Mr. Often for the Disability Commission?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Prisby, can you read the motion into the record, please? Sorry.
Sure, I move that Matthew Offen be appointed to the Disability Commission.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those by roll call vote say aye.
Frisbee,
Roy,
aye.
I.
Often I.
Carlson, aye. Declare motion carried. Thank you. All right. I'll remain on the DPW Facility Committee, seeing how we're almost wrapping that up. Economic Development Committee, Doreen, do you still want to serve on that in that capacity?
Yes, if the rest of the board agrees.
Okay. Awesome. Fire Department Study Committee, that's kind of reached its end of life. There's no, we finished the report, so I guess we have to figure out, I think it's done, but I don't think anyone wants to be on a defunct committee. So Library Planning Building Committee, I know Brooke's been a big part of this from the inception for this. I'm personally okay with him on this if everyone else is fine with that.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Prisby.
I think with this, both this and the Shared Services Committee, I think we ought to move toward a more active role in our committees and a little bit less of the outsourcing. It would be good, especially in light of some of the difficulties with the construction on the project, if we had somebody on our board there getting information in real time. Those are just my 2 cents.
All right. Any other discussion from the board?
Mr. Chair, how often do they meet?
I could tell you they meet pretty regularly right now because they're in the midst of the building project. So like we do on DPW, and I kind of was there towards the, towards the end of significant construction on that project. They meet once, maybe twice a month, and sometimes they may be subcommittees. Actually, I was given from a good authority that they meet once a month, first Monday of each month. Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, I think that in this phase of the project that it would be a mistake to pull Brooke Paget off because I think he's valuable on this committee. But I also think it doesn't eliminate the fact that maybe we could have a select board member attend these meetings. So maybe not be the voting member of the board, but make the decision as a board that we would like a committee member present at these meetings to communicate what's going on directly. And I would volunteer to do that if no one else wanted to.
All right. How's the rest of the committee feel?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Often.
I'm comfortable with that. That makes sense to me.
Okay. Mr. Roy?
I just have a question. As our representative, does Mr. Paget come in and give us an update regularly? I don't really remember seeing him coming in and giving us updates in the past.
Mr. Roy, Mr. Paget, along with the OPM, Andy DeShane, have come in on a regular basis throughout the year when the project is required for us to have some significant input or change orders. I feel that, they've done a really good job of communicating when those events have come up. The Library Planning Building Committee is an open meeting. It's by no means a closed group, so it's open to the public, obviously. And they've been pretty regular with coming to us when they need to. But for a lot of the things that are going on now, typically, unless they run into some sort of snag or they need to inform us of some sort of significant change, like I said, we probably won't hear from them maybe getting towards middle to the end of the project when they start wrapping things up. That's just how I've experienced these building projects go. Okay. Doreen, do we need a motion to have you just be a representative for this? Maybe a non-voting member, obviously, just to participate. Do we not need that? I mean, if you're going to attend it, I'm fine with that too. But
Right.
Mr. Carlson,
Mr. Alton.
sorry to interrupt you. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Terry Turgeon is asking, basically saying that there should be a member actually on the board versus Brooke.
Okay. All right. Let me see here. For some reason,
I just kind of agree. I want to second that. We've got two committees here that are being staffed by people that we don't see often who aren't on this board, and I just don't understand why we're doing it.
okay. With respect to the first board, guys, with the shared service committee, I don't even know when the last, I think they met many years ago. So I don't even know if that's really an active thing, and we should talk to the school committee and the finance committee about that. And if it's no longer active, I think that, we should take whatever appropriate steps to either, shut that down, or if they are meeting and we're not knowing about it, then they should tell us, if they have met and what have they been talking about. I think that from a continuity standpoint, if the committee is fine with Doreen being on this, because it's like 9 members on this committee. And given the fact that there are some cost overruns with it, they've been extremely transparent with those. I mean, have to be. I mean, they can't just say, "Hey, we're not going to tell you about it." So, if the committee's fine with Ms. Stefazio, or if you want to make a motion to make that change, please do that now. I think we've kind of talked about enough. I'm fine with Doreen, Ms. Stefazio being on it, and I'm also fine with Mr. Paget at this point in time maintaining his tenure with the project.
Mr. Chair, I move that Doreen DeFazio be our representative on the library building committee.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion, this appointment?
Yeah,
Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
Mr. Prisby first, then Mr. Often.
Just this, this is our role. I think it's an important signal to the community that we're doing this. And, we're making the move to take control of our responsibilities. I think it sends a positive message to the community. I know Brooke Paget is not going anywhere. And I'm sure that where he needed to be in communication with Ms. DeFazio, that they would be able to communicate, and she would be able to tap any of those resources that she needs to, given his institutional knowledge.
All right, any further discussion, Mr. Austin?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. First, I would like to see if Brooke can stay on. Maybe not as the select board rep, but as a member. And also I'm wondering if Doreen is supporting this motion.
Mr. Fazio?
Mr. Chairman, I do support this motion because I think that Mr. Prisby has made some good points. There comes a time where we have to take a look at this and take responsibilities for the projects and be representatives on these projects going on in town. And as much as I like the continuity of having a big project like this have the same members, I also have confidence that like Ed said, like Brooke's not going anywhere. I can ask him questions, and there's 8 other members on the board. So I think that if we're going to do this, and this is going to be our policy moving forward, to have select board members represent these committees, that we need to do it. And this was a discussion last year too, and we didn't do it. So I would be in favor of it, and I would get up to speed.
Okay, I still have a motion made and seconded on this. Is there any further discussion before we take a vote? Okay, hearing none, all those by roll call vote?
Frisbee, aye.
Often I.
Fazio, aye.
Roy, I.
Okay, I'm gonna say Carlson nay. Okay. All right, Doreen, you're on that. Okay, next up here, MBTA representative for the Mass Transit Authority. Anyone want to step up to this one?
What is it exactly?
The MBTA rep probably is a committee due to the T-stop that's here in North Grafton for Route 30. So I believe this committee, Mr. McInerney maybe can enlighten us. This was before my time, since I came on the board, that this was created.
Yeah, there's actually 2 representative spots on this. They deal with everything from scheduling to commuter rail fees and everything in between. Take feedback from the service stops and delivery areas that they have. They generally meet quarterly, and their meetings are in Boston. So that's the only tricky thing about it.
I'll do that. I'm in Boston a bunch. If
Oh, wait a second, Mr. Prisby, I'm sorry. One second, Mr. Fazio, go ahead.
Oh no, if Mr. Prisby is volunteering for this, I have nothing further to say, but thank you.
I'll take the T.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Ed Prisby as our MBTA representative.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote, please.
Often I.
Fazio, aye.
Roy, I.
Frisbee, aye.
Okay. Next up, an appointment for the Open Space and Recreation Committee. Do we have any volunteers for that?
Do you know how often they meet?
I believe it's monthly. But Mr. McInerney, do you have any indication how often they meet?
Yeah, they've been redoing the open space and rec plan now with CMRPC. It's in its final stages, has to be adopted by the board. Gives us opportunities to apply for grants competitively. But it's been a long time for that document to be created. So they've been meeting a lot of recent. I think it's winding down. I would think a monthly meeting is sufficient, but until that plan is completely finished, you're probably looking at every other week, at least until September, until the board ratifies it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. McInerney. Any volunteers?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Prisby?
can I just ask a question? Matt and Colleen, are either of you interested in this?
Yeah, I'll do that. That sounds fun.
Mr. Chair, I nominate Colleen Roy to be our Open Space and Recreation Committee liaison person.
Second.
I have a motion made in second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote, please.
After I.
Fazio, I.
Frisbee, aye.
Roy, I.
Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Okay. Okay, and then there's the tax increment financing, the TIF committee. Doreen, did you still want to remain on that one as well?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it sort of goes hand in hand with the Economic Development Commission. So we don't meet unless we have to, but historically, that's how it's been, that the person who is the representative on EDC also serves on the tax increment financing.
Okay,
I'll stay on if the board agrees.
I'm fine with that. Everyone else good?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Hoffman?
you have Colleen in as
Oh.
recycling.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
We skipped over one here. I apologize. So let's just finish up this one. So everyone's fine with the tax increment financing with Doreen. Okay. Let's move back here one. My apologies. Recycling and Solid Waste Study Committee. Mr. Fazio, this was a committee that you are resurrecting. I take it you are still, I think did we appoint you to that yet?
Mr. Chairman, the board has not appointed me to that yet, which is why I added it to the list. So, since I'm sort of spearheaded this, I was made the assumption that I would be the board rep, but we need to have a vote.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I motion Doreen DeFazio be the select board representative on the Recycling and Solid Waste Study Committee.
Second.
I have a motion made in second. And any further discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call, please.
After I.
Roy, I.
Frisbee, aye.
Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Okay, just real quick, I keep getting a question from Ms. Turgeon here with regards to going back to the motion about the library building committee representative. It is my understanding that Mr. Fazio will be taking the place as a voting member on that committee where Mr. Paget has served in that capacity. Is that the understanding of the committee? So I see a bunch of heads nodding yes and thumbs up. Okay, so that is in the affirmative. Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. I appreciate it. Okay, that's it. I'll get this list over to Ms. Duncan after the meeting. And let's move on to next on the agenda for resignations. So we'll need a motion to accept the resignation of Mr. Childs.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fazio.
I move the board vote to accept the resignation of Nick Childs as Director of the Emergency Management Agency effective July 15th, 2020, and send him a letter of thanks for his years of service to the town of Grafton.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made in second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call, please.
After I.
Fazio, aye.
Roy, I.
Carlson, I declare the motion carried. Okay, next up, we have Mr. O'Brien from the Assessor's Office.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fazio.
I move the board vote to accept the resignation of Ken O'Brien effective July 6th, 2020.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, just sort of discussion on this in the last one. How do we recognize the, many years of service?
It's in the letter that we will send notifying that the resignation was voted and accepted at the select board meeting.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote, please.
And I.
Roy, I.
Frisbee, aye.
Fazio, aye.
Carlson, I declare the motion carried. Okay, thank you. Next up, we have appointments for the Select Board, Library Board of Trustees. Stephanie Teixeira. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Fazio.
I move the board vote to appoint Stephanie Teixeira as a Library Board of Trustees serving a term until the next local election on May 18th, 2021.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
So how do we get, how do we know who's applied for this or that this is the only interest in this?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Mr. McInerney.
Yeah, just two quick things. When a vacancy occurs in any multi-member body, there has to be a dual appointment, if you will, by both the committee that's vacated by the person that had a failure to elect or a vacancy occurred. So that committee, the Library Board of Trustees will have to have a vote to basically appoint as well. It's supposed to be a joint appointment, but given the fact that we have difficulty coordinating meetings, they had met with Stephanie and they support her moving forward. I believe she was the only applicant that was interested, and we couldn't get I think the Martina, who was left in March 2020, we didn't have enough time to put that ballot question before the voters for May. Otherwise, it would have been a balloted item. So it's going to take both this body and their body to affirm the appointment of Stephanie. In terms of the application and the opening, I'm sure we got Stephanie's information here and we sent it along to the Library Board of Trustees.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Prisby.
Just a quick question for you to Tim. Tim, can you just explain how it works for those of us who are newer on the board and those of us who have never asked before and those of us watching at home? So if you want to be on a particular board or committee, do you make application through your office or do you have to figure out who the appointing authority is and make application through them? What's the process like?
There's an online portal that people can go to with all the vacancy announcements on it. It goes to back to the policy of when vacancies occur. We have a weekly or bi-weekly notice in the newspaper that just says, there are many vacancies within the town of Grafton. If you want to apply, please visit the website to see what those vacancies are, just as an attempt to get the word out there and trying to be consistent with the mindful of the cost of those advertisements and the publication that's required under the charter. So they apply through the portal, go to the clerk's office, it'll come to us, and that's how people apply. I don't know how Stephanie found out about the opening. I don't know if she was reached out to by the Library Board of Trustees. Word of mouth seems to be that, and Facebook seem to be the way to notice people that there are vacancies.
Ms. Roy?
So I just wanted to ask a question about the policy that you're referring to. In the policy, it says that we're supposed to be advertising on a quarterly basis in the Grafton News. Is there a reason we're doing it more often?
Because different committees have, like, for example, in the Board of Health, they actually make the request of us to put it in the paper, so we oblige that. The moderator might have appointments. We might ask him what his druther might be. But for your appointments, if it's not quarterly and it's more often, we just need to test that to make sure we're doing it consistent with the policy. If there's a lot of openings and a lot of vacancies, we want to get the word out there. That's the method we probably go with, is to do it more than quarterly. But quarterly is the goal.
I just have another question. The policy states twice that it needs to be updated on the town website, and currently the town website is not reflective of the openings on both the Affordable Housing Trust and Board of Health. Right now, the town website says the Affordable Housing Trust has 3 vacancies and the Board of Health has 0. So when does that 2-week timeline start? When we update it on the town website, or when we put it in the Grafton News, or when it gets put on Facebook? Because the policy clearly states it should be on the town website.
Once we receive notice of a vacancy and you approve it or accept it, we send it to the clerk's office and they update that vacancy announcement. So if there are ones that are not up to date, I can follow up with the clerk's office on those.
All right. I have a motion made and seconded for the appointment. Is there any further discussion on the appointment for library trustee? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote, please.
After now.
Roy, I.
Frisbee, aye.
Fazio, I.
Carlson, I declare the motion carried. Okay, thank you. Next up, we have appointment for Affordable Housing Trust, Mr. Kushner.
Kusher.
Kusher, sorry, Kusher, thank you. I always want to say Kushner, my bad. Sorry, Dan. Okay, can I have a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Frisbee,
I move that we appoint Daniel S. Kusher to the Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Frisbee,
just briefly, I have taken a look at the citizen activity form that Mr. Kusher submitted to the town in his application to be on the Affordable Housing Trust. And, I'd like to share it if that's okay with you, because I think it's really well written.
absolutely, go, if the committee doesn't object.
It reads, I lived in Grafton for almost 7 years, and one thing I keep hearing is that we don't have enough affordable housing. I hear it expressed in various ways. Seniors who raise families here can't afford to stay here. Young adults who grew up here can't afford to start families here. And of course, the emotion-free, just the facts expression of it, that a disruptive 40B development, too big for its location, could pop up anywhere in town. As these conversations have been going on around me, I followed along and learning a lot about the state of affordable housing in Massachusetts and the laws that govern it. The Commonwealth's affordable housing laws are far from perfect, but they do provide incentives and opportunities that Grafton should be taking advantage of. At the same time, we should be working with our state legislators to see if there are ways we can improve upon those laws. Grafton's struggle with affordable housing is a problem towns all across Massachusetts are dealing with. I don't like to complain and do nothing. I like to help fix these problems I see around me. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, Secretary for the Friends of Grafton Public Library, and Chair of the Grafton Democratic Town Committee. I do these things because I want to be a part of the solution, especially when I see that not enough people are helping to step up. I'm going to be taking a break from the Friends of the Library soon, and I would love to replace that commitment by filling one of 2 vacancies on the Affordable Housing Trust and see how I can work together with existing trustees to bring a more affordable housing to town. I thought that was probably one of the better articulations of why anybody would want to be on the Affordable Housing Trust that I've read. So I just wanted to read that out loud. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Frisbee. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Opton?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I love the fact that like a little teeny spot appeared in his calendar and he's like, how could I serve Grafton? That's exactly how it works in our household.
Right, okay. All right, any other discussion? Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I feel like I don't really want to go into this too much, but I feel that I owe the public and this board an explanation of why I voted nay last time. And so I wanted to give the courtesy of giving that. I have not had direct discussion with Mr. Kusher, but I have had a very nice email dialogue with his mother who reached out to me. And it's not the technicalities for me that are the reasons why I voted no. And the other vote was not orchestrated in any way. It just landed how it did. And for me personally, my issue was with the some online behavior that I saw that I'm personally very sensitive to, and those behaviors did not align with the attributes that I wanted our boards and committees to embody in Grafton. And so, again, I'm one member of a 5-member board. I will, accept what this board wants, and I just wanted to give that reasoning of why I voted nay last time, and we'll move on.
All right, Mr. Fazio, thank you for that. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor by roll call vote, please.
Often I.
Roy, I.
Fazio abstain.
Carlson, I declare the motion carried. Okay. All right, guys, thank you. So we got through appointments. And before we get on to new business, is the committee okay if we take something out of order tonight and allow Mr. Haddad? I'm sure he's here for financial policy review. I don't want him to be waiting, towards the end here. Okay. All right, thank you for that. So we're going to take this out of order. We're going to be going to discussion on letter G for financial policy review. And I want to welcome Mr. Haddad here, who is the newly appointed chair of the Finance Committee. Okay, welcome.
Thanks for having me tonight, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Can barely hear you.
Better?
Nope.
I'm having a problem with my speaker, I guess. How's that? So bad?
Better.
Okay. Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
Yep.
So thank you for having me tonight. The Finance Committee had reviewed all of our financial policies, and we wanted to deliver them to the Select Board and have you approve them at your convenience. We updated the financial policies to add the OPEB policy, and we also reviewed and looked at the debt policy and re-voted and reaffirmed that particular policy. Finance Committee thinks it's important to have those policies reviewed annually and updated. We think it helps with our bond rating. We think it helps with the way the town is managed financially. And we would ask the Select Board to take those policies, review them, and at your convenience vote to approve them as the Finance Committee has.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Haddad. Is there any questions or anything you want to bring up to Mr. Haddad? Okay. So just to understand what you're asking the committee to do, Mr. Haddad, you want us to review this at a future meeting, come back with an adoption of this policy?
Yeah, I think it's important that you take the opportunity to review them as the Finance Committee did. And then if you have any comments or any concerns, we'd be more than happy to come back and meet with you and discuss them. Finance Committee is satisfied with the policies as they're drafted right now and would recommend to the Select Board that you approve them.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on that? Mr. Opton and then Mr. Fazio.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important that we do ratify these policies. They're several pages long each, and I think we each need to really take the time that we need to review them. I am wondering if we need some type of subcommittee or want to designate somebody to actually go through them and, work with the town administrator to see if there's any changes that we should be making beyond what the Finance Committee's done already.
Mr. Fazio and then Mr. Prisby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you, Mark, for coming to the meeting tonight and preparing on behalf of the Finance Committee these policies. So we also have in our packet the policies that are already in place too from the town administrator's office. And so, which begs the question as we sort of look at both of them, and this is coming from someone who was not on FinCom, right? To go through those details and see what's being changed and really what's already put in place. It looks like OPEB, for example, is a change that the Finance Committee is looking for us to vote in favor of. I don't know if, just working off of what Matt said, I don't know if necessarily I'd be in favor of a subcommittee, but more of this committee maybe workshopping with Finance Committee and, using one of our workshop weeks to go over this in greater detail. So, all board members and Finance Committee can start collaborating and having these conversations of what's working and what's not working, because from my perspective, what's in place on the town side too is may not be outdated as far as policy, but seems like some of these are coming from 2010. So again, I recognize that there are board members who have already done this work being on Finance Committee, but I think maybe a workshop, and who is now involved, it would be a good discussion to have. And in the meantime, this board reviews and we put it on a future agenda as a workshop item. That's my 2 cents.
Any further discussion? Mr. Prisby, I believe you're up next.
Yeah, I mostly agree with Doreen. I think a workshop would be a great idea. I think that's probably the most efficient way to do it. I don't think it's too many cooks in the kitchen. I think there are going to be some new members of FinCom too. Might be helpful to get to know them. I also think the summer months are a good time to do this before the next round of budget discussions starts going forward. You want to get these policies in place to the extent that there need to be changes. We can get that taken care of pretty quickly. I think just getting in a room, hashing it out, we can come up to with an end product. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Ms. Roy, anything you wanted to add?
I agree with everything I've been hearing. I love the idea of getting in together with FinCom and working it out.
Okay, great. All right, so from what I understand, thank you, Mr. Haddad, for sending this over tonight and being here for this part. Would you be amenable to setting up a workshop in the near future and we can work up the schedules and figure out the logistics?
Absolutely. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, one of the things I wanted to convey to the select board tonight, the finance committee met last week, and we are excited to work hand in hand with the select board as we approach the next fiscal year. We're very, very pleased to be here, and we'll do whatever the board thinks is in the best interest of the town. So absolutely, we'll definitely work in a workshop with the select board.
Okay, great. So if the committee's okay, is it okay if I work with the chair of the finance committee and Mr. McInerney on logistics on figuring out when this would be appropriate in the near future? Obviously, I don't think we want to push this off too much, but I want to make sure there's adequate amount of time to review the submittal tonight. Plus, it gives us time to review it ourselves, especially non-FinCom member select board members here, which I think that's me and Mr. Fazio. It allows us to give us enough time to maybe not only ask questions to the town administrator, but also seek some additional clarifications on some things that, I'll be honest with you, maybe outside of my understanding. So if the committee's okay with that? Okay. No objections. All right, I'll take that as a to-do moving forward. Mr. Haddad, was there anything else tonight?
No, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you waiting. Thank you very much for your patience, and thanks for making it to our meeting tonight.
All right, have a great meeting.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for that. So let's go back to the beginning of our policy under new business. So I asked to put this on, which was a vote to support the Grafton School Committee resolution on COVID-19 state funding. So let me just kind of preface this a little bit as something that personally I'd like to see our board get more involved with is as we see some of these resolutions come across, because this type of funding is for our local community, for our town. I don't really look at this as just, for school, but things like this, I believe our board should be taking a more active role. So I was forwarded a resolution that basically calls upon our Governor Baker, Education Secretary, Commissioner of Education, Senate President, House Speaker, the Joint Education Committee co-chairs on both the state representative side and on the state Senate side. And if it's okay, I'll just read this out loud for the public, if the committee will permit me. Resolution states, whereas schools are to reopen this fall in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the responsibility of each school district to do so safely and responsibly. And whereas it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that each school district is able to pay for the enormous additional staffing, transportation, materials expenses required to do this. And whereas the state cannot expect mandatory COVID-19 safety guidelines to be followed without also ensuring that each school district has the funds required to implement these guidelines. Therefore, let it be resolved that the state must guarantee every school district full reimbursement for whatever COVID-19 expenses are required to follow the state mandates. We must ensure a statewide school reopening that is safe, responsible, and equitable. There can be no unfunded mandates for COVID-19. And right below that, I have it signed respectively, each member of the select board. So if there's any questions on this, again, this is something I really want to see the select board take more of an active role in with our community, especially when it comes to funding these local initiatives that affects us on the local level. Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Prisby.
I move we vote to support the Grafton School Committee Resolution COVID-19 state funding.
I have a
Second.
motion. I have a motion made and seconded. I labeled it Grafton Select Board Resolution, by the way.
Oh,
My name is spelt wrong. Does that matter?
I'll fix that, Colleen. That's my bad. I forgot the other L. Ms. Prisby, we make an amendment to your motion and have it reseconded by Ms.
yes.
Warren.
Vote to support the Grafton Select Board Resolution, COVID-19 state funding.
Second.
Thank you. Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call, please.
Often I.
As do I.
Roy, aye.
Yeah.
Carlson, aye. Thank you very much. I'll have that in the town office for us to sign and send off to everyone addressed to the list. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. So let's go select board reports. Anyone in the select board have a report that they would like to give?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Prisby.
Briefly, the Grafton Sustainability Commission met this week. We went through, I think, what is going to be the penultimate draft of the benchmarking report. We voted on just a couple language changes and some data that we are going to kick over to the municipal cost structure report and school cost structure report. So I think we're going to vote on a draft a week from Thursday and have that put up on the website. So that's where we are with that.
All right. Thank you for that update. Anybody else have a select board update they would like to give the board tonight? Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Prisby. Mr. McInerney, do you have a town administrator report that you would like to give?
Yeah, just briefly, a couple items. The vice chair thanked everyone for town meeting and for the election. So I just really wanted to reiterate that the work we did for Saturday and the setup was unparalleled. We got through it safely and without incident. So I appreciate everybody's work to keep people safe and get us through town meeting and then the election. So I wanted to thank everyone who participated and who helped us set up for that. So we appreciate that. Today I sent you all an email. I got noticed from the town clerk that there were 102 ballots in the vault that were not counted as they were discovered today in the vault by the assistant town clerk while doing other filing. We will have to file with the Superior Court tomorrow that'll allow the votes to be counted and the totals included in the total vote. Again, there are 202. The town clerk is preparing a press release and obviously is deeply regretful that this happened. She would have to explain to you, the structure of the office, and when they get votes in that were mail-in or early ballots, they usually bring them to the day of the election to be counted at the same time as they go through the voting machine. That box was inadvertently left sealed inside the vault and was discovered today. So it's unfortunate news, but those votes will be counted, but we need a court order to do that. So town council was involved in a conference call today with the state elections board and Candy, and we're working through that detail now. So we want to apologize for missing those. And again, Candy feels pretty terrible and regretful about the whole circumstance. But I want to share that with you now as I sent it to you earlier today. But once we learned of it, we knew we had to let the board know. What'll happen now is after we get approval from the court, the election workers will be assembled in a conference room where they'll open those ballots and count them by hand.
Okay. Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, just Tim, one more time, because you said two numbers there. Is it 102 or 202?
I apologize. 202, 202 ballots.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Mr. Prisby?
Yeah, just obviously a follow-up for people that are at home wondering, and I think I saw something in the Q&A, that it's possible that could affect the override vote because the margin in the override was 98 votes. Tomorrow's July 1st. So how does this impact budgeting going forward for FY21 right now?
Well, there's two questions. We'll be 3 or 4 days in when we know the vote. And if the override were to fail, I mean, you would need those 202 ballots to be 3-1 against. That wasn't the case across all precincts, but it could happen. I just don't think it's likely. So we would actually go back to the original budget in Article 5, and the board will have to decide if it wants to try again and at another date for another election.
Anybody else have any other questions? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how we message this to the public. Obviously, it's kind of a big deal. And we want to make sure that we get the story straight and that people understand what happened and what we're doing to make sure this doesn't happen again.
The filing at court needed an affidavit from the clerk and the assistant town clerk that listed on a timeline that was being worked on today. That in conjunction, or that in part and parcel with the press release, will be what the message is. I mean, just the facts are the facts. And the second part of your question is probably more relevant. How do you guard against it in the future? And the clerk's going to have to answer that question.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we've engaged so that people feel confident.
Yeah, I mean, immediately, upon discovery, the clerk called the state. She called legal counsel. She contacted us. We had a conference call. We took necessary steps to do the filing and the affidavits and so forth to get those votes counted as quickly as possible. So we're going to Superior Court tomorrow, hopefully before 10 a.m.
Anybody else have any questions? Mr. McInerney. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Prisby, go right ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to belabor the point because I understand that mistakes happen. This is during a pandemic. There were an abnormally large number of people who were doing this by mail-in voting. But for the benefit of the public, we're positive now that there are no further boxes of ballots that are going to be discovered. I mean, how did we miss 202? And what are we doing to make sure that this is the end of this story?
Well, the vault has been searched for other boxes that have those ballots that were found. They're all in the same boxes. I think they were placed on top of counted ballots that were already opened. And so when they were placed there, they were just locked in the vault and not thought of again and not brought. So I don't think there are no other ones. She's looked in the vault. She wants to correct the mistake and keep it from happening, especially with this election. So can I guarantee you, did I go look in the vault? No, I did not. So I cannot say that. I can just rely on Candy that she did an exhaustive search for other ballots that weren't open and she found none.
Mr. McInerney, given the amount of questions we're getting online, I think a lot of these would be beneficial if our town clerk were to answer them directly in the press release. So if there's any way that you want to capture some of these questions, I think it's best to have our official who is in charge of our local elections address these and not, have us do it. Elections are, in my opinion, very sensitive to a lot of people, and having the clerk really address them directly coming from the source, I believe, would be more than reasonable, unless anyone else has another opinion to that.
I agree 100%.
Okay. All right. So I guess we'll be discussing this a little bit further down the road and probably to some extent, some future meeting. I'm sure this will be an agenda item that we'll discuss to see, what we can do as a town to perhaps maybe to Mr. Prisby's point, to help prevent this from happening again. And we're going to move on unless anyone else has anything they have. Mr. McInerney, do you have anything else that you wanted to give a report on? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
No, it's fine. It's an important point. I mean, the whole reason why we did everything for COVID-19 and setting things up and taking protocols is to order to have democracy occur. So town meeting prep and making sure people were safe and still being able to carry on governance. The election is a huge piece of that. We take extremely seriously that, the votes of the people are the lifeblood of what we do. So we take it extremely seriously that we forgot 200 ballots. So it's not lost on me, the gravity of that situation. But what's important is we're not turning away from it. The clerk is taking it head on and dealing with it with integrity and professionalism. So that's very, it's very near and dear to my heart that she's taking that on. So I have a couple other points on other matters, if I could just get through those.
Absolutely.
All right, so I reported a couple times on 8 Pine Street. The P&S is ready. It will be signed this week by GSX. It was reviewed by counsel inside of Ginny Kramer's firm by a real estate attorney. You will have it as soon as it's signed, and I'm hoping, well, I know I'm going to have it on the 7th, July 7th for you to sign, but I'll have it ahead of time so you can review it. It is fairly lengthy, but all the terms and conditions that were laid out in the RFP or the invitation for bid are part and parcel. And as a matter of fact, that document that they are signing was part as the requirement to have it part of the invitation for bid. So there's not a lot of deviation from it, just filling in the numbers and setting the dates for deliverables. It will be the detail piece of it. So those details have been worked out and all parties legally are satisfied with it now. They just have CSX principals to sign and then obviously the select board to sign. We are arranging a number of calls for GSX with Tufts and Job Corps as they are the biggest neighbors of this development at 8 Pine. So we want to have early discussions relative to the proposal and what the timing will be, and just to bring everybody in a room and have introductions and get that particular piece out of the way and get people in the vicinity of this development comfortable that this will be coming in the next 12 to 18 months in terms of construction. So given that this is a short week, we have 2 new members. We have to post 48 hours in advance for any meetings. So if we're going to have a meeting on the 7th, we need to post that agenda by Thursday at noontime. So if the membership has anything, town hall's closed on Friday to celebrate the holiday. So I just want to remind everyone of that. If we can get whatever agenda items you want on the agenda for the 7th, we get to us on Thursday. We are also working on 27 Upton Street disposition. We are working with Chris and obviously John Allen to look at the disposition of this, and we hope to have an RFP out on the street by August 1st. Obviously, we have, new experience, or not new, but existing experience with this relative to 8 Pine, so it should be an easy document to create and put out. There is the Historic District Commission that we need to have discussions with about the barn. So there's some nuance there that we'll work out before August 1, but we are on that and moving that forward. We did receive a note from Nature's Remedy regarding their grow facility. They applied for a tier 6 license with the CCC and they are waiting. I think there's a 3-week comment period that either the CCC can make or the public can make. I was never clear on that for that tier. So we did get that notice. If you remember a couple months back, we asked all the people we had host agreements with to give us an update on their status. So we received that this week, and I just wanted to share that with the board. This building is open by appointment only. We do check-in visitors every day. Staff still self-certifies on a daily basis that they have no illnesses, they're not sick, and they feel well to be here. We still have people working remotely, and as long as those departments can be effective in their operation and execute their duties, we are continue to let people work from home and to keep traffic down in the building. So far, there's no, there have been no issues with either visitor check-in for the hours we are open to the public. And again, even those people who work remotely, I just want to stress this, if you leave a message or if you leave an email, staff is dedicated to check those voicemails and check those emails and respond in a timely fashion. So, it's within a few hours of the left message that they return it. So we want to encourage people to continue to call. We'll still provide service some way, somehow. And so far, we've done a good job with it. Regarding positions, we know Ken O'Brien in the assessor's office is leaving us for a bigger and better position in the town of Uxbridge as the principal assessor. So I kind of feel like a training ground for some folks, but it's good that he's learned enough to let him move on. He's actually serves on a board of assessor in Mendon, I believe. Anyway, so we'll have to go through that process. It's a union position. We'll open it up first to the union and then we'll go out for it as well. There's a lot of data collection involved with his position. So that's why new growth is robust as it's been, is because we have someone there on a daily basis looking at building permits to come in and then going out and listing and measuring those particular additions or enhancements to commercial and or residential properties. So with that, that's one. The town accountant, we've advertised for that for the past 3 or 4 weeks. We look to have interviews next week and the week after. The goal for the fire chief's ad is for tomorrow. I did send a note to the study committee relative to membership on a search panel that everybody wanted to be on, and it's very, very difficult to coordinate. I have at least 4 staff that'll be on that search committee panel and 3 members of the committee as well. So I know Peter had mentioned, at least in an email to me, he was A, interested, which is great, and B, that the board might want to have some input on the position description, which is fine. I can send that along if you wanted to modify the position description. But in terms of the charge of the committee to do the search, the board has never got involved in that aspect of it. They've always trusted the fact that we can go through a hiring process without, any threat of discriminatory bias or what have you. So I want to at least keep to that and have that maintained inside the town administrator's realm, if you will. Also consistent with the charter in terms of the day-to-day operations. But the position description clearly is something Peter did is the board can modify that as it see fit. So I welcome that. I just don't want it to slow down the advertising process because it will take some time to recruit the best possible candidate for the job. And then just 3 other points. We did receive an extension for the MassWorks grant for Route 30. We had some delays due to COVID-19, as you can imagine. So we did receive that extension today. So that's great. We are still coordinating with National Grid, the railroad, and 2 private developers to repave Route 30 next month. So in July, that road will be repaved and we'll do adequate notice to the businesses along there and to the board. And finally, we're continuing to prepare to close the books. Purchase orders and encumbrances from an accounting standpoint are all being worked on with staff and the consulting firm. So those are the 10 or 11 things I wanted to cover with the board.
Any remaining questions on those last items? Ms. Roy?
I just wanted to go back to the fire chief search committee. So is that committee, you kind of already have who would be on it, or you're still looking for members, and how are you picking the members?
Well, because there was so much interest on the committee from each committee member when I originally put out the request, I think all but 2 had time to do it. So it was tough for me to get all of them. And then I thought, well, I can just pick these folks. And then I decided, well, maybe they can, as a group, can meet and have a representative that they want and trust and respect, put them forward to me to get on that committee. So I gave that option to them earlier today, so they can decide for themselves who they want to be on the committee. Or if they one member wrote right back and said, just pick them. So that's fine. I can do that. I just thought I would try to be a little bit more democratic about it. So if they don't want to take a vote to say who it will be, I'll just pick those 3 members.
Ms. Roy?
So the total committee makeup will be 7, 4 staff and 3 members of the study committee.
Is our current fire chief involved in this search party at all?
No.
Did you consider that at all?
No.
Would you consider that at all?
It's a very difficult spot to have a discussion with a call fire chief that's done extraordinary things for this town on a day in and day out basis when you're talking about replacing him with a full-time chief. So that is, I mean, I have conversations with the chief, but not on that level, because I think there's some, I can't find the words to say, the consternation that folks might have over that and being in that mix. It's tough to pick your successor if you're not really ready to retire. I don't know how else to tell you that. So there's nuance there, dude.
Any other questions? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm interested in, I guess, exploring, obviously the new chief has to fit in with the current leadership team, and they have to be brought in a, this is really difficult. It's really sensitive, and I appreciate what you're saying, Tim. But at the same time, we have to transition a group of, call firefighters over to a new leadership team ultimately. And I'm just wondering, what's the best way for us to do that? I'm not sure what that is, but it needs to be deliberate and it needs to be an actual transition, I think. So I'm not sure if there's been discussions about whether this is just kind of a quick thing, or whether we, bring the chief in as in a consulting role to help with that knowledge transfer and, bringing the current call firefighters over from his leadership to another, leader. I don't know.
We do expect there to be a transition time where the chief stays on. We just in terms of timing, this is going to take some time. The advertisement piece, the interview piece, that interview piece won't happen until the assessment center is complete. And once those applicants meet that baseline assessment, then we'll do interviews. And then we'll, some of it will depend on the quality of candidate we get that can help us with that transition. Because it's a big deal, because we're going to a place we've never been. And we're very, very cognizant of that fact and respectful of the people that are loyal to the chief now, and he's been loyal to us. And I just want to pay as much balance and respect for that work as much as we can as we move forward to this full-time leadership position.
Any other questions, Mr. Prisby?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to jump back a topic here. We got a couple questions in the Q&A about when the ballots are going to be counted. I thought I heard Tim say within a couple days.
Mr. Prisby, if you recall, I think that question is going to be best answered by the town clerk themselves and not by us or Mr. McInerney, as they're charged with running all of the elections.
Okay.
No one objected to that, and I was going to respond to these people to some of the questions in the Q&A with those exact words. So if you're okay with that, that's fine. I just don't think that this is the right place to be answering those questions, and the town clerk should be addressing the public with those answers to these questions that are listed in the Q&A.
Well, so I think we're in the right place. I just think we're the wrong people. So I would suggest that we get her to the next meeting, because there are going to be people that are going to be concerned. Voting is a fundamental American right, and even little mistakes like this, I can understand how they happen, are going to need to be explained at length. And so I would suggest that she be with us at the next meeting to offer an explanation to the public.
Okay, I'll add that to Tuesday's agenda. Is any other questions on anything that Mr. McInerney was talking about with the fire department, unless we need to keep bringing this back up? Ms. Roy.
I just wanted to go back to the chief's involvement in the search committee, because his involvement will continue after the new chief is hired. So having some input on that 7-member committee might be useful, in the sense of they would be working together when the person is hired. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Mr. Opton, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't consider the 202 ballots to be a minor issue. I think it's a pretty major issue. So I'll expect some significant input from the town clerk in terms of what happened and what the remediation plan will be going forward. We have some important elections coming up, obviously. So we need to make sure that we have public confidence in the process.
Of course. Anything else? Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to add and echo what my colleagues are saying, which is, although I agree of having the clerk here or at a meeting next week, I would expect that we would get some kind of, notice, memo, PR from her, within the next day, answering some of these questions so that the public knows and doesn't wait until the next meeting to get answers.
real quick, just as a logistic question on that. So the questions that we have here in the Q&A, speakers, are you able to get all of that information and present that to the town clerk for them to address? Thank you. Okay. All right. Any other discussions on the town administrator's update? I do have a couple things I want to bring up with the fire search committee. Mr. Fazio.
Sorry, just one more thing. I just want to add that I'm requesting this because I don't want there to be false information as well. So as much as I also believe in transparency and that we need to share this information with the public as soon as possible, my intent too of getting this information as soon as possible is so as soon as this starts to spread and people start talking about it, I don't want false information out there. So I think it's important that we nip it in the bud. Thank you.
Really noted. Ms. Roy.
I'm not sure the circumstances when you call an emergency select board meeting, but is this something we should be considering and maybe hold another meeting tomorrow night where the town clerk can come in and just address these issues with the most up-to-date information? So we're not waiting a week and letting this grow more than it is.
That's a good question. And I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you, without touching base with town council and just making sure that we're dotting our i's and crossing our t's. There's very few things that you can bring up in an emergency meeting. There's no pending election coming up in the next few days, obviously. The next one's not until September. We understand that these votes are going to get counted. They have to go through a process. So if the committee wants me to explore setting up an emergency meeting, I mean, the earliest technically we could have it would be Friday.
I thought you could do it sooner than that if it was an emergency, that the 48 hours didn't really apply.
Again, someone's on the board's got to tell me what the emergency is exactly, so I know what question. I don't want to assume that I know what question or what emergency you're bringing up. I don't want to take that responsibility. So is there a specific emergency reason that you want to have a meeting sooner?
How do I want to articulate that? I guess so that people could know that the election ballots that were found are in good hands, and that there's questions that they all are asking right now, and I'm sure will continue to ask as this story gets out, are addressed in the most professional manner possible.
Okay. All right. I'll look into that, Ms. Roy. Okay, give me till tomorrow morning to figure out what those logistics would be. I'll work with the town administrator on how do we set that meeting up and what the procedure would be moving forward for that. In the meantime, if there is, for whatever reason, it doesn't fall within that category, for whatever reason, again, I don't know what I don't know. The next meeting would be on Tuesday. So if we can't have it sooner, is everyone okay with Tuesday as well? Just want to make sure that that's acceptable. Okay. All right. Any further questions on the TA's update and report? Mr. McInerney, I do have one thing I wanted to bring up, and just as part of the consideration of the screening committee charge, I understand, all of the members on the fire study committee is daunting. It's 9 members. And one of the things I would really like to consider is utilizing existing fire department personnel, people who are the call firefighters. I know a few of them who are on the committee are. The reason for that is these people have to go back to each one of their stations and talk about, who this person is and why they were chosen. And I think that in order to Ms. Roy's and Mr. Often's point of view and seeing a smooth transition as possible, I'm of the liking of being more inclusive, especially for such a change in this role that Grafton is going to be undertaking over the next year. I think we can all agree that this is a new era for Grafton to be going into, and just to cover all of our bases. I know when we do other search committees for larger leadership positions within Grafton, there's a lot more hands on deck, but I was just curious about what your thoughts were about making sure that we appoint people who are also active members of the fire department, who are staff members of the town of Grafton.
Yeah, I mean, from a staff perspective, obviously I would have myself, the chief of police, Paul Canoia, who's obviously on the fire department and the head of the DPW, Rebecca, and the three members to make it a full seven would be either, like I said, the committee who I'll pick the people who already displayed interest, or the committee can pick those people and recommend them to me. And if it turns out that they're from each member department, that's great. But I was trying to let them decide for themselves, or I can look at what role they have inside the department and which station they represent, and then just grab them from those particular departments or those stations.
Okay, just a suggestion on my part. All right. All right, that's all I have. Okay. Um, moving on. Correspondence. If the committee would accept, I'll just read the correspondence summaries that we received. A letter received from Mr. Yeomans asking a status of Worcester Street roadway repair work being placed on a future select board meeting agenda. That was in one letter to us, and the other one was there were 6 letters that we received over the course of the week. Grafton works towards ensuring safety of all residents in our community, regardless of skin color, religious beliefs. These letters came in response to a recent incident of police brutality that took place in the United States. So, all of us have received those letters. If Ms. Roy and Mr. Often hasn't received copies of those, what I can do is I can forward them back to Ms. Duncan at the TA's office to have her forward those to you directly to make sure that you received all copies of those. Okay.
I did receive those.
Okay, great.
I got them as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. That's all I have for correspondence. And Ms. Roy, that'll be you next Tuesday. All right. All right. Moving on here to 7, Town Administrator Review. This is under discussion, letter A.
Is this fine?
Mr. Prisby, I believe you asked to put this on. Yes.
I did because I'll just keep it really simple. We haven't done it yet this year. And I think part, a hallmark of being a professional board is to be able to be consistent with our practices and policies. I think we want to have staff reviewed every year. So it's been over a year. We should probably do this. In fact, no, we should definitely do this.
All right. Any discussion, Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I agree. It's my understanding that the last time this was done was February 2019. And I don't know if this is a yearly review or not, but I'm in favor of doing this review. The one thing I will say is we have 2 board members that have only worked with the town administrator for less than a week at this point. And so, maybe there can be a discussion around time frame, perhaps not waiting until next February, but maybe a time frame that makes sense for the 2 new board members to be able to review and work with the town administrator over at the course of a month or so, at least. I would suggest maybe September timeline so that we all have an opportunity to do a fair and full review.
Ms. Roy?
Has there ever been a 3-member review? Like if we were to just sit this review out?
I didn't hear it. You broke up there. So if you were asking me, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I don't know who I was really directing the question to, so I apologize on that. But in the past, has there ever been like a 3-member review rather than a full board in the instance that maybe an election happens? But usually it sounds like it was happening before an election, so it probably hasn't come up. But like to Mr. Fazio's point, Matt and I haven't been on the board very long. So do we want to delay the review further, or is it just make more sense to do a 3-member review?
Well, I can just point you to the charter and to the contract that the board shall review and evaluate the town administrator every year from the date of appointment. And what should be contained in the review and the evaluation tool is developed jointly by the TA and the Board of Selectmen. So maybe that would be a starting point. Certainly for the new members is to review those two pieces as a guiding principle relative to the goals and objectives and the timing of the review. Certainly the goals, you had a meeting in August. It was more of a board related goal. And we fulfilled some of those. Some were easy, some were more difficult. But given that there are two new members, that maybe the goal setting piece happens now and you monitor those over the next 3 months, 6 months, and then evaluate fully in a year on the goals that you set, say in July. So you can work inside of a fiscal year, which is not inconsistent with what the language is in the contract or the charter relative to the town administrator's review process.
Okay. Mr. Frisbee.
I wouldn't mind just doing it with the three of us and then having Matt and Colleen just fill in on the goals part. That's fine. That way it doesn't become a review that's basically 18 months and then another one in 6 months. After that, we're a little behind. So, you know, I think it's important to maintain some semblance of a review period so that we're not thrown off for years at a time.
Okay. Any other
Mr.
questions?
Carlson. Yep.
Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'd be happy if you guys want to just run with it. Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable really doing any kind of review process, and it would be good even for kind of goal setting. I'd like a good quarter to just kind of get settled in and understand, you know, just really get plugged into what's happening before I'd really even want to have that discussion. So you know, for myself, I wouldn't feel comfortable in being involved in a review process, at least for a quarter, and maybe not even the goal setting at this point. I really feel like I need to get involved first and get some experience up. For me, I'd be happy with just proceeding ahead with what you have, and just not including myself.
Great. Any other questions or comments? So, oh, Mr. Fazio, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank Matt for his insight and wanted to know if Colleen was comfortable with 3 board members moving forward with the review, or if she wanted to be included, what her thoughts were. Thank you.
No, I like the idea of a 3-member review just so that the timeline can stay consistent and it doesn't go too large. And to Mr. Prisby's point, where it would be another quick review after that, it would throw things off.
Okay. All right. Any other questions before I talk about next steps? Okay, so I'll work out the logistics for the review process. I'll work with Mr. McInerney on that. And we will put this on the agenda for the next meeting and we'll discuss more concrete next steps and timelines going forward with that review. Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay. Mr. Fazio.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, could you please also add a goals review meeting to the agenda as well? I think that it would be good to talk about both these things in parallel so that we as a complete board and staff have a timeline moving forward of when, you know, we want the review session to be, when we want the goals meeting to be, and who will be involved in those. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yep. You want that for the next meeting, Mr. Fazio? Okay. Okay. Anything else on the town administrative review discussion topic? Okay. Moving on to update on MRC contract. So, Mr. McInerney, I know it's been about almost a year to the day. We discussed the MRC contract. I'm not sure what the specifics are, what this discussion item is, but I don't know which member asked to put it on, but if they want to, Ms. Roy, is that you? Okay. If you want to go ahead and open up and ask away on what you need an update on.
Right. So basically what you're saying, it's been a year since we signed the last contract. So I was wondering if it's time, if there's another contract that needs to be signed in the near future and how it went this last year. I know this time last year when it was discussed, it was the majority of the board was really interested in turning it into a 501c3. What steps have you taken to start making that happen? Do we still have 16 communities involved? How has the recruiting, retaining, and training been going? Are the numbers trending in the positive direction? Just an overall update on how it's been going.
Okay, contract with the city of Worcester, or we do have a contract renewal that is an annual renewal for the grant through the city of Worcester. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, I believe that was how you were going to be paying the stipend for the new, I guess, coordinator. Is that the right term?
Yeah.
But right, that was whatever would be expiring that we signed about a year ago.
Okay, Becca, do you have an update on when we might get that from the city of Worcester?
Yeah, we will have one for the board. It does take a little bit longer, only because there's a delay in approval on the federal level that they have to get through the city before they have the individual regions actually sign off. But we do expect, I'm hoping sometime in July to have a contract before the board for this new fiscal year with the city of Worcester, who is really just the financial funneling agency, so to speak, for the funding for the Greater Grafton MRC. But we'll be able to move forward with FY21 as soon as we get that contract signed by both the city of Worcester and the Grafton Select Board.
And I did reach out to Karen when I saw this on the agenda, not knowing what you were looking for. Karen at the Board of Health, Karen Garvin, not Karen Clark. And after our last meeting, they took it up once, but they didn't come to resolution whether it should be, because you have a couple different options, right? We could give it to another community. It could be Greater Worcester County. It could be whatever the greater is. It could be run by another community. We could continue with staff running it internally. It could become a 501c3. That'll be a heavy lift for someone to move that along, or you can give the entire operation back to the city of Worcester. So those are kind of like, those are the options before us. In terms of, what we've done in the year, I won't do it justice to cover what Mary Ann's covered. I'll just tell you that I think in last year in 19, we had 191 people available to us to give us medical reserve support. Today we have 233. They come in an email portal to us. They have to get query checked and certified. So there is a delay in that, but we do have increased volunteers. They've done training. They've done online training. They had a lot of things scheduled that got postponed due to COVID. So they did some online things. But I would rather have, if the board would oblige, I'd like to have Mary Ann come in and just tell you all the things they've done in the past year and just give an annual report to the board. Because I think it's worked great, but obviously we had our struggles convincing people that it was going to work. But I'd rather have you hear it directly from her.
Fair.
Mr. Prisby?
Yeah, Tim, I would like that. I'm curious about the content of the 200 something volunteers, whether they're active, inactive, investigatory, what the content is there, just to make sure we're headed in the right direction. So I would like to have her come in. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? So I guess the next step is here. We'll have the MRC coordinator come in, depending upon how our agenda looks at the next meeting or the meeting after that. But before I could move on, Mr. Often, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, emphasize that, as we think about going forward, a potential vaccination program, this is, a critical function in town. So I'd agree with bringing her in and just getting an update on that.
Great.
I can tell you that the last time they did an EDS site was in January. I think there were, and then there was another one in Upton. I think there were 60 volunteers. So it's a good number. People, it's a voluntary situation. The way they test, really, to Ed's point, the 233, when we did a test for like town meeting, they all responded. Some said, got the message, can't do it. Some said, I got the message, I can do it. So in terms of responsiveness or participation in trainings, that's the only way we know that they're they're active, and it's hit or miss because I may not get the same people the second time. But she can explain how that online portal works in the text messaging component.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, so we'll put that on a future agenda, either next week or the week after next, depending upon how next Tuesday's framing up. Moving on to COVID funding. Mr. McInerney, you were going to give an update on that from your earlier comments.
Yeah, I think it was you, Peter, who wanted that on there as well, right? So hopefully, if you have questions, I'll try to get to those when I'm done. So the CARES Act allocated basically what our unrestricted local aid number is, 1.6 million. 900,000 is FEMA reimbursed, which is a different process than the CARES Act, that money comes directly from the state. So I worked with the school department. We submitted our application, I don't know, 3 or 4 Fridays ago, probably 3 Fridays ago now, for that portion that is just state, not FEMA reimbursement eligible. So we did receive a check last Friday for $764,500, both for realized costs that we've had as a result of COVID and estimated future costs. They range from everything from disinfecting municipal buildings, school lunch programs, rental assistance. There was a number of criteria in the application that you had to fill out, and then that form actually sorted what was FEMA eligible for reimbursement and what the CARES Act through the state money would give us. So that 900,000 will be a separate FEMA reimbursement that we will apply for, and then the 764,000 is on hand to do things like distant learning for the school department, incremental costs for special ed, food to families, accelerated telecommuting capacity. Obviously, we talked about that earlier. If people have the ability to work from home, they should do that, and we can use those funds to offset that. Food bank, they gave me a trend of what they were spending on gift cards, and we were able to recoup some money for them. And then the short-term rental assistance, Chris McGoldrick is working to find an agency that it could administer and set up a program, and we can probably use some of these funds as well as affordable housing trust funds to augment these dollars. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I will tell you that last week they had more guidance for education and back to school for the fall, and they did release those guidance, and they did have an additional $200 million that could be available for school districts to apply for. The overall school request for the COVID, this CARES Act was about 1.1 million. So a lion's share of that 764 obviously will be spent by the school department to get them ready to go back to school. So I already talked about the application. They wanted to know real cost to date and expected. So we did a lot of estimating of what our true exposure might be. It's a guess for both the school and the town, because we just don't know. We didn't have, for example, we didn't have guidance from the state on how the school year would be set up. There's 3 scenarios: back to school fully, some remote, some staggered. So they have 3 different scenarios to work under. So each of those have different cost structures associated with them. So, we just don't have a lot of real-time information. So we made the best guesses we could. And we can always ask for more should those costs go higher than what we anticipated. So that's the update on that.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that? Mr. McInerney, if you could just give us periodic updates as to how that's all unfolding. I think that'd be important for us to know, but more importantly, the community. I think it's got a lot of people on edge, but knowing that there is some potential funding to help offset these costs, especially for reopening, some of the key components of our town government and services would be much appreciated. Mr. Hoffman, did you have something that you wanted to add?
I was just wondering, if we have good guidelines on how this money can be spent, I guess, and what the plan is for it going forward. Are we just too early for that, or?
No, I don't think we're too early. I mean, I gave some of the broad pieces from the telecommuting, the distance learning, planning for the school department. There were parameters that went along with the FEMA requirement and the CARES Act portion. So we'll spend for what they're allowed. They gave us the lump sum 760 upfront
Okay.
on our application so far. So we have cost, like town meeting, for example, that $16,000 that we had talked about when you were chair, we will use these funds to offset those costs.
And
So-
how's that authorized? How are we authorized to spend that money?
Probably through the emergency declaration and the fact that A&F sent us a check for $764,000 based on the application that we provided to them. So I don't mean to laugh. I don't know a good way to answer it, because it's very odd how they had it set up, because when you went online into their portal, it actually made calculations based on the area of funding of what would be funded by them and what would be funded through FEMA for a reimbursable.
Got it.
So it was
Okay.
kind of convoluted, but we'll stay within the guidelines of FEMA and the CARES Act. There's no doubt about
Okay.
it.
I just want to make sure that we are transparent. Yeah, and how the money is spent, and that there's an accounting of it, and that we really understand where it's all going to, and that at the end of the day, there is still a lot of uncertainty, particularly, well, pretty much across the board, but we want to make sure, I think, that the money's spent in the most valuable way possible, I guess. And I'm just from my old days on finance committee, I get concerned about things like trying to incur, operational costs with one-time money, which obviously this would be. So just things like that. So I'd be interested.
Yeah, they will not, anything that was budgeted. So if we had money budgeted for the food bank and it was an appropriation that was already made, we can't use the money from the CARES Act or from FEMA. So it has to be an unappropriated amount that was related to COVID, to combat or to deal with the issues created by COVID-19. So if we can't pass that test, then we cannot spend that money.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. McInerney. I'm just curious, is there any sort of reporting back to the CARES Act or to FEMA based on their guidelines related to COVID? So you said that you explained to Mr. Often that, that as you filled out the applications, they determined what would be funded from the CARES Act, what would be funded from FEMA. And I'm just curious if, in this conversation of tracking everything and making sure that we are, basing it off of these guidelines, I'm just curious if there's any reporting back to either CARES or FEMA.
Yeah, the document that we had to submit for the 764, 500, I had to sign a certification relative to 6 or 7 points, and one of them was a bi-monthly reporting requirement for incurred expenses that I have to send to the Secretary of Administration and Finance and the governor's office. So there is a reporting requirement that I have to comply with. The FEMA piece is different because it's a reimbursable, and the guidance on that has not been crystal clear to me at this point, but it's not crystal clear to anyone at this point either.
Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, just to follow up to that, and I'm sure this will be done, but just if the board could get copies of those bi-monthly reports, that would be helpful.
Yes, sure.
Ms. Wright, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand go up.
Nope.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Okay. Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, I would just actually be interested in putting Mr. McGoldrick on our agenda as well, perhaps for next week, because, I think it's important to, when you have a goal, you need to set an end date, and it's not enough to say we're working on something and tout it as an accomplishment. We really need to shepherd this across the finish line and make sure it gets there. We're now in April 1, May 1, June 1, now it's July 1, 4 months of first day of the month rent into this pandemic. And I'd like to be able to get this accomplished rather than say we're just working on it. So I'd like to have that put on the agenda. and keep this on a tight schedule for next, maybe on the 7th.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you for that update, Ms. McInerney, and thank you to the board for the good questions. I think we've all seen here there's a lot more to this, and as it's being developed as we're going along. So it's like, well, we appreciate all the efforts, Mr. McInerney, that you and the rest of the staff are putting towards this. I understand it can be frustrating when you don't know, like you said, about the FEMA, like how that all works, and it's not clear to anybody. So I just want to recognize the those challenges. Moving forward, next on the agenda item is local tax relief program.
So speaking of keeping things on a tight track, I need to hold myself to the same accountability here. When last we talked about this, I owed you guys a charge for this, and I just didn't get submitted in time for the packet, but I think I can read it out loud. Someone tell me what's wrong with it. We'll correct it, and then I'll get it submitted, and we can approve it or not approve it on July 7th, if that sounds good. Okay. So what I would want to do would be, the town of Grafton shall create a taxation aid committee. The committee will consist of the chair of the Board of Assessors, the town treasurer, and 3 residents appointed by the selectmen. The role of this committee will be to share information available on existing aid programs, investigate and explore new programs that may be available to the town, including MGL Chapter 60, Section 3D, and make recommendations on those programs to the Board of Selectmen. And that's what I've got. That's the same program that we talked about the last time.
Anybody have any questions, Mr. Fazio?
Do we want a board rep?
We can. We can do a board. We can do a board rep and just 2 residents appointed by the selectmen. I don't see why not.
I'm okay with either, just throwing out the question for discussion.
Sure.
Anyone have any points that Mr. Fazio brought up about adding a select board rep to this committee? I guess I just have one question if no one else has anything. So very much like the Grafton Strong account, I want to make sure that this is, being handled in the most confidential way. I think when people come up and ask and qualify for assistance, it is very intimidating for them. I mean, imagine being in their shoes and looking for that same thing. I just wonder if a board member, in lieu of maybe another appointed person from the community, might be more apt to be appropriate for this committee. And I only bring that up just to see how everyone else feels. I just wanted to express my feelings on that and see if anyone has anything that they want to add to it.
That's fine. I think I'll probably, I'll amend it and submit it for a vote next week with including a board rep on it. That's fine.
All right. Mr. Fazio, did you have something that you wanted to add more to that?
Yeah, you just brought up a great point, Peter. And I think, we could go either way with this, right? So my thought of having a board member would be to hold us accountable for the committees we're creating. But the other side of that, which you brought up, is we want this to be effective. And will it be more effective if there's not a board member on there? And this is a committee that at least has, it has the appearance of being more confidential if we don't have a public official on it. So.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry. I think I misunderstood your point here.
So I could go either way. I'm not an expert on this. So I would go with whatever the rest of the board wanted to do. I was just originally brought it up for our own accountability to be on committee. So whatever the board decides as a whole is fine by me. I'm in favor of the idea overall.
Mr. Prisby?
Yeah, just in further thinking about it, I know what Mr. Fazio is saying. I think the more I think about it, though, I'm not sure about the appearance of a member of the select board handing out taxation assistance. I would want people to be unelected filling that role. You know what I mean? have appointed members, but unelected ones.
Anyone else have any other input?
I'm fine with that decision.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Fazio. Anybody else? All right, Mr. Prisby, I'm fine with that decision as well. Appreciate you seeing that point. But I think it was a great question that Mr. Fazio brought up. We should be asking that question. Is having a board member on there going to be the most effective for that committee? To your point, having an elected official on there, does it, handing out rent, or being part of rental assistance, I should say handing out, being part of that is appropriate. But I appreciate you all taking my input on that. And if you want to bring that charge forward, put that and send that to Ms. Duncan in the office. We'll make sure we get that on the next agenda for vote to consideration.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything on tax relief program before we move on to summer schedule? Because the way our summer schedule's looking, I don't think we're getting any breaks. So let's talk about that. All right. So all of you have received a copy of the summer schedule earlier. Does anyone have any questions or concerns on the dates? Is anybody going to be on planned leave or going away anywhere? I don't know where you're going to go, but I figured I'd ask. Mr. Fazio.
I just want to propose something based on discussions we've had tonight about the tentative workshop meetings on July 14th and August 11th. So I'd like to propose that our tentative workshop meeting on July 14th would be a finance committee workshop and discussing those policies that Mark Haddad brought forward this evening, and that the August 11th tentative workshop would be our goals meeting.
Okay. Does anybody? Yes, Mr. Often.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering why we wouldn't do that in reverse. I think those are both great workshop topics, but we're sort of newly formed, and I'm just wondering why we wouldn't just kind of jump into our goals and objectives first.
I mean, let me ask the committee this question. Again, this is for logistics. Do you think we can pull off two topics on July 14th for the FinCom fiscal policies and have a goals discussion and just keep it to those two items on the 14th?
I don't think that's reasonable. Those are pretty extensive policies,
Okay. All right.
but that's just me.
Mr. Fazio, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, just to answer Mr. Often's question, I had proposed it that way just because I'm linking the goals meeting to the town administrator review. And because I'm uncertain of that timeline, and July 14th is going to be here soon, and we already have all the information to review for the financial policies. That's why I had proposed it. I understand your viewpoint as well. So.
Okay. All right. So August 11th is basically 5.5, 6 weeks away. It's not that far off. We're starting July 1 tomorrow. Does anyone else have any more input on Mr. Fazio's recommendations for proposed workshops for July 14th being the Finance Committee financial goals and August 11th being the goals? Mr. Often?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Doreen. So to you, Mr. Chair, to address our point, I'm happy to swap those to basically what she said, which is we do the financial policies first.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Fazio?
We can also amend this whenever we want. This is just a proposed schedule. So I'm throwing it out there, but if next week we decide we need more time or we want to add a meeting on the last week of the month, we're always welcome to do that. So I'm just, being enthusiastic about discussions we've had and adding them to our calendar, but we can change them at any time. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any comments on scheduling? Okay. Moving on here. So Recreation Disabilities Commission to make parks more inclusive. I'm not sure which one of us, I didn't set this agenda up, so I'm not sure if someone could, oh, thank you, Mr. Frisbee.
That'd be me. So I put this on the agenda because, there's a lot of discussion surrounding the super park over the course of the past year or so. And certainly during the town meeting, there was, I thought, some really stirring and persuasive arguments being made in favor of super park on town meeting floor that had everything to do with creating more inclusive space for children with disabilities. So, and I'd also heard, some conversation in watching the last CPC meeting that maybe the park was voted down because people didn't understand that part of it. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the case at all. I think people understood the park just perfectly fine. It wasn't a lack of understanding that defeated the super park. I thought it was a lack of an appetite and maybe some questions that people still had about how best to serve that particular community and how best to create inclusive spaces. And I know for myself, one of the things that I was missing, a key piece of data that I was missing, was some conversation with our own disabilities commission about how they might have felt about it, some data and numbers about what it actually would cost to choose parks that already existed in the community and to make those accessible. And I wanted to not pass over the opportunity if people do feel strongly and do feel this is a moral need, as I think it is, to create those spaces, to really follow up on that energy and say, okay, that idea failed, but what else can we do? So what I am suggesting is that I suppose, workshop or maybe call into one of our regular meetings, both the Disabilities Commission and REC, to see what else can we do here. I know Recreation talked about, we're saving a little bit of money this year by not hiring lifeguards. That money can go back into parks. Okay, but does the Disabilities Commission have some input? Where are we going with this? What's the plan? What is possible for us to do? What is not possible for us to do? I'd like to have that conversation with these groups.
Any questions, Mr. Fazio?
I agree with this 100%. And I don't know if where we fit it in, if we have it as just a discussion item on an agenda or if we workshop this. But to add to Mr. Prisby's idea, I think it would be helpful for the board to have from the rec department a list of parks in town, what our budget is, what the conditions of those parks are, and if there are any plans of inclusiveness already in place, or if there are plans of upgrading any parks in town that we can, start with. Is there an opportunity to add an inclusive plan to parks that are already budgeted to be fixed, if, in a condition to be fixed? And I think it's a great idea to also involve the Disabilities Commission in this, provide them with all this information as well, and then have a joint discussion. So I'm glad that we're following up with this discussion post-town meeting.
Anyone else have any questions or input? Mr. Austin.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it makes sense to bring the schools in at all, because obviously there's playgrounds at the schools and they also have accessibility concerns as well. So I know that the Disability Commission study didn't include the schools, but there may be a conversation to be had there in terms of prioritizing the work.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So from a logistics standpoint, our summer schedule here, when do we want to anticipate having these groups all come together and meet? I mean, as of now, we have 2 workshop dates for July 14th and July 11th. July 11th is the goals meeting. I'm wondering if we could lump those 2 together and discuss, making the parks more inclusive with the Recreation Committee and the Disabilities Commission. Mr. Fazio.
Chairman, sorry to say I'm very protective of our goals meeting, and I would like to just keep that discussion separate.
Okay.
I would propose that we could have this discussion during a regular meeting on July 21st, or if that agenda gets filled, to add a meeting the last week in July.
Sounds good. Okay. Anybody, everyone's okay with that?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Prisby.
this just totally reminded me of something that I meant to bring up earlier. If it's okay, can I talk briefly about the goals meeting just for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This was something Ms. DeFazio had brought up last year. And at the time, I felt pretty strongly that I personally wanted it to be televised. And if you recall, Mr. Chair, we got together in the South Grafton Meeting House. It was awkward TV viewing, to say the least. And I'm not sure we necessarily achieved the spirit that I think Ms. DeFazio's idea originally was intended. I would be open, and maybe we talk about this next week, but I would be open to having this one off campus. And I'll just say this to people who might be watching this. In no way, shape, or form am I suggesting that we would hide the ball from the public or we don't need to be filmed. I'm a big proponent of this. But as we saw from the past group that we just went through, we sort of really failed to bond. I think we missed an opportunity there to more casually talk about our ideas. So maybe that's something we talk about at the next meeting, but I would just want to throw it out there for as something for people to think about. Sometimes, obviously sunshine is the best disinfectant, but every now and again, you want to have your select board meeting in a casual way that builds camaraderie. Certainly the meeting would be posted and open and all that stuff. But I don't know that it needs to be at South Grafton Meeting House again. I would be comfortable in any locale that was a little more casual to just sort of generate that degree of camaraderie. That's all. But just to hear you guys talk about it reminded me to mention that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Prisby. I don't know, let's see how creative we can get for finding an appropriate venue to meet those objectives. If anyone else has any differing opinions or has a different idea. Mr. Opton?
I just wanted to point out a couple of things in the Q&A. Roger Trahan pointed out the ADA evaluation and transition plan. That's up on the Disability Commission webpage. So that's a good reference point for everybody. And there's a couple of other comments there from Margaret Haynes. The space wasn't just for play equipment, and she points out that it was all ages and all abilities for the super park.
Okay. All right, anything else? All right, so we'll work on that. Thank you very much. Thanks for that update, Matt. Thanks for picking that up for us. All right, we've already discussed the financial review policy. Next up, we have meeting minutes. So I will entertain a motion for meeting minutes.
So moved. Mr. Chair, I move we approve the meeting minutes from June 16th as written.
Second.
I have a motion made in second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote?
Frisbee, aye.
DeFazio, aye.
Carlson, aye.
Often abstain.
Roy abstain.
All right, I declare the motion carried by 3-0-2 with 3 approval, 0 nays, and 2 abstentions. Thank you. Okay, at that point, I don't have a reason to go into executive session. So before we adjourn, I just want to thank everyone for joining tonight. We appreciate it. And hopefully everyone has a safe and happy 4th of July weekend. I know I speak on behalf of the board. We hope you enjoy some nice weather coming up and you're able to be with your families or your friends, as long as safe and reasonable, obviously. So I just want to thank everyone for their time. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Can I ask a quick question?
Ms. Warren, sure.
Tim, you mentioned that the board has a bunch of policies, like we discussed earlier, the vacancy. Can I get all of those policies? Are they posted somewhere that I can review them?
Yeah, after the last meeting, when we had that discussion, I asked Joanne to scan them as a PDF and get them on the Board of Selectmen's page. So yeah, they're in different places because they were voted on at different times, but yes, we'll get them up on the web as quickly as we can. I think she started
Appreciate
working.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We can have a motion to adjourn now.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made second. All those in favor by roll call vote?
Frisbee, aye.
Fuzzy, aye.
Roy, aye.
Carlson, aye. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.